Hi, everyone. This is Miranda Ward with the Valuable Voices podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to Krystal Talley. Her and I met in, it was a Crush It Challenges group, but 100X, and she'll tell you a little bit more about it, but this Kingdom Entrepreneurship group. And I feel like some people have been in a lot longer than I have, but I'm just so blown away by a lot of the model, and I'm learning every day, and it's just so much fun. So I can't wait for you to hear from Krystal. How are you today?
I am fantastic. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to join.
Of course. And we'll get into your podcast. She has the Hearing His Voice podcast, which I listened to this morning, and so good. I love how you share kind of your personal experience of how you hear his voice, and I want to hear more about that. But let me know, how did you first get introduced to 100X and Pedro?
So it's sort of randomly, but we all know that God uses random things on purpose, right? So probably the end of last year, I was listening to Sean Bowles' podcast, Exploring the Prophetic, which I love. And Pedro was a guest on his show. And I was like, who's this Pedro dude? And then, that was the first time I ever heard of him. And then I swear, I saw Pedro everywhere. There were ads. There was like, I'm like, who is
funny.
this dude? And I saw that he had a podcast. I think at that point, I listened to like 1 or 2 episodes. I was like, yeah, he's not for me. But then he was doing a wisdom challenge this past January. And I was like, I had just been talking to the Lord. I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to study Proverbs. And then boom, I don't know how Google does it, but they like hear what you're saying and then they put it in front of you.
Yeah, for sure.
So I joined the wisdom challenge, and then he made the offer for 100X, and I was like, and I just got the yes from the Lord. And I'm going to tell you that I joined 100X in January of this year. It's now October, and my mind has been blown with all of the things that the Lord really wants for kingdom entrepreneurs. And I'm doing things I never thought I would do. I've started businesses that I never thought that I would start. I'm developing relationships with people that are just so phenomenal. And the best thing is that the Lord is expanding my thinking. And I didn't realize how small my thinking was until getting involved in this community. So for those of you who are thinking about being an entrepreneur, I would highly suggest, getting around a group of people that can stretch you. And I really believe that iron sharpens iron. That has not been more clear to me than in the last 10 months of how true that statement is.
I love that. That's so interesting, because a friend invited me to the Wisdom Challenge in January. I literally remember, I live in Chicago, so scooping my snow on the driveway and listening. But it was a 30-day, and I was real consistent, and then I wasn't. And so I think I missed the offer to join. So did you join Acceleration?
Yes.
Okay.
I joined
So I did not. And I kept hearing about it. I'm like, how do I get into this? Like, I wanted in, but I couldn't. So I just finally did. So I'm going to start that now. And I'm already like, I don't even know what I'm in for, but I'm so excited. So what businesses have you started?
So so let me give you a little history. So back in 2018, I've always had a heart for real estate. And I was like, I want to be a real estate investor, because the Lord told me years ago, not enough of his people own things. And so, when you own, and if you've ever studied in real estate, if you go to the real estate school, whatever, when you own property, you own the airways above and you own the dirt beneath the property.
Ooh.
And so, when you come, in everything natural, there are spiritual connections to that. So when you own something, you have the right to kick out trespassers because it's your place of authority. And then from a spiritual perspective, the same thing. When you have ownership of something, you have spiritual authority over that thing. And so from there's a lot of crime in our communities. There's a lot of, just terrible things, but that's because there's not enough believers that own things that not only take natural authority over things, but spiritual authority over those communities. And so that's kind of where I want to go. I'm not there yet, but that's kind of where I'm going. So I started this business, and then I could never get anything off the ground. And so I finally figured out, okay, maybe that's a future thing. What am I supposed to do now? And so I set up some DBAs under that LLC. And so I am a notary signing agent. So I will do mobile notary stuff. The Lord had me start an Amazon store this year. So I'm like, what? So I'm doing that. I also am doing, oh my goodness, what else am I doing? You'll have to edit this part out because I don't.
No, you're
I'm like,
good.
there's like a couple of other things. Like I was an Uber driver for a while and just all these different ways. And I feel like the Lord is having me merge a lot of those things together, because it's all ministry, it's all impact, it's all connecting with people in these various ways. And so one really cool thing about one of the businesses I said I was a notary. I have a foster son, and this family that I met, we started talking about foster care, and they're like, it's something we've thought about. Well, they are now potentially my child's adoptive family. So we're going through this process just from me randomly going and watching them sign their name on their loan refinance.
Wow.
So the Lord can use all these different things that we're doing for greater impact. And I just think it's amazing.
I love that. So I know you've done a couple challenges about hearing God's voice. Kind of take me through, because we were chatting quickly before this, and not everyone's, I don't want to say at that level, but as in depth and hears him as clearly and maybe listens and is obedient as you are. So kind of talk through whatever you want to share, your childhood and kind of how you learned to know him and who he really is.
So I got saved when I was 8, but I did not grow up in like what you would call a Christian household. We didn't go to church. My mom knew enough to put me in Christian school. And so that's kind of where I learned who God was. And then, in my teenage years, we finally did start going to church. And I fell away from the Lord a little bit because I just saw a lot of things in church that I was like, I'm not interested. And then in college and going through some adult situations I put myself in that were not good, I was like, God, there has to be more than just this going to church thing.
Yeah.
And so I was able to get connected with a couple of communities that had some prophetic bent, but I knew somebody as a child that heard God's voice, and he would tell me stuff that I'm like, he talks to you like that? Really? I was like, I want that. I didn't know what I was asking. And so I just became a seeker. So I spent time in the Word, and then what I saw, like stuff would pop off the page at me, and I was like, whoa. It would be like it would kind of pulsate off the page, so I was like, okay, let me learn a little bit about that. Then I started thinking about using the dictionary, like the words that we use. God is very specific about the words that he uses. And a lot of times he's got multiple layers. And so when you read the dictionary to find out what the word actually means versus what you think it means,
right.
The concordance, you're like, oh, that's what you were saying. That gives it a whole new light. And I just started to notice things. And I feel like when you are a seeker, the scripture is, ask, and, seek and you will find. And that is so true. When you decide, Lord, I really want to hear you in a greater way, he will show it to you. Mm-hmm. You just have to have your antenna up. So I always use this analogy, right? Like, if you want to turn the radio on in your house, right? There are radio stations that are playing 24 hours a day, no matter what station you go to. I mean, It's all constant. But unless you turn the knob on and you tune into the right station, you're not going to hear anything. It's just going to be static. And so you have to get your antenna raised. And so part of that is saying, okay, Lord, I want to hear you. Will you show me how you're speaking to me? And when you do that, you start looking. Like, have you ever shopped for a new car, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
You decide on like, I bought a Toyota Highlander, but I didn't know what car to get. And I'm like, what do I get? And I kept seeing these cars. And I'm like, okay. And when you buy it, it's like you see them everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same thing. So when you start saying, okay, Lord, I want to hear you, you will start hearing. Mm-hmm. Your awareness is expanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I found over the years in talking with people, even believers, they don't recognize his voice. And it's not that he's not talking, it's just that we don't understand how he's speaking to us. And there's
Right.
lots of different ways. I mean, we have, like, I don't know if you are married or even if you have children, but if you in relationship with people, your ability to connect with them and understand them comes from relationship and time spent,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
So if you are in a dating relationship, right, the first time that person calls you on the phone, you're like, who is this? You have to ask, like, you don't know the voice. But after you've talked to that person and been in relationship with them for a year or 5 years or 10 years, sometimes they don't have to say a word for you to know that there's something heavy on them or something
Right.
that they're concerned about. You watch how they move through the house. You listen to how they sigh. You know,
Yep.
you pay attention to how they, slam the cabinet door shut, right? You're
Yeah.
like, hey, they didn't say anything. We're like, something's clearly going on.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the Lord. He's the lover of our soul, right? The more time you spend, the more you understand his ways.
That's
And
so
when you
good.
understand his ways, you're like, okay, there's something happening. Let me engage with that. Lord, this is what I'm sensing that's happening. What are you trying to say? What do you want me to do with this? And then
Yes.
he begins to unveil those things. But you just have to raise your antenna, and it just starts with just starting the relationship in a more
Yeah.
deep and profound way. And that's what I share with people. Like, it's easier than you think. And
Yeah.
he can use literally anything to talk to you.
Yeah. I
He
love
can
both of those
use,
analogies. I mean, it is. I love that. Just turning off the dial, but you have to be willing and you have to be
right.
open. I've kind of been on this walk for a couple of years and I always want more. I think we always want more. I'm like, come on, you're talking to her that way.
Mhm.
So what are the ways you hear him? Is it a song? Is it journaling? Is it, just kind of, visions, or how do you hear him best? Or give us an example.
All of the above.
Yeah.
I think the thing that is, so since I was a little kid, I've always been a dreamer.
Mm.
And people would tell me, oh, that's just deja vu, because I would dream it and then it would happen. And like, while it was happening, I was like, okay, then they're going to do that. Then they're going to do that. Then they're going to do that. And I was like, why do I know that? Because he already
Wow.
showed it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And some things, right? And so he talks to me through dreams. It's songs on the radio. Like, I was going through a rough time, and there was one song that always gave me hope. And every time I found that I was kind of in a rough place, I would hear that song. They would sing it at church. It'd be on the radio. I'm like, okay, Lord, that's how you're telling me I'm going to be
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
He also will talk to me just through people. And I found, like, talking to my kids, I get a lot of revelation about how the Lord deals with us through how I engage with my
Yes.
kids.
Yes.
Um, I'll hear myself say something to them, and I'm like, oh, okay,
He's
that
saying
was
that
for
to
me.
you basically too. Yeah, totally.
I was like,
Yep.
that happens a lot. But there's so many different ways. But the thing that I think the one way that it kind of trips people up is that he can use our own thoughts. And
Right.
I got really convicted about that. I was like, Lord, that can't be me. Like, that's not, how do I know it's not the enemy talking to me? How do I know it's
Right.
not just me? And that's one area that he wants to use. And he redeemed everything, right? He created our imaginations. Why wouldn't he use them to talk to us?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we've been taught since we were children to dismiss a lot of things. So when you're a
Mm-hmm.
kid and you have a dream and you tell your mom and dad about your dream, they say, oh, it was just a dream. And so we are taught as kids to dismiss it. Oh, that's just your
Mm-hmm.
imagination. Oh, you daydream. Oh, stop daydreaming. God
Mm-hmm.
uses all those things, but the enemy has set us up from when we were kids to make us think that those ways of communicating are invalid. And so
Right.
as adults, when we have a dream or when we have a thought that crosses our minds, we immediately dismiss it because we've been conditioned to dismiss those things. And
Mm-hmm.
the Lord wants to redeem that. That's crap.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
can use it all. He can use it all. Now you have to sanctify, you have to work through it, and talk to him about it, but he absolutely can use that. And I love my journal.
Yes.
I read a book years ago, Conversations with God, I think it was what it was called. And that was probably like 6, 7 years ago. And in this book, this man like just starts writing, and he writes down whatever thoughts come back to his mind. So I'm like, Lord, there's some things that are in this book, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really,
Yeah.
the enemy counterfeits stuff that's real. But I was like, Lord, if that can happen, if it's being counterfeited, then there's something real. So I want to test you in that. So I would ask a question, and I would wait for the answer, and I would just write. And I've been doing it for years, and the Lord has developed that, and anybody can do that. And
Right.
I asked the Lord, I'm like, Lord, are these my thoughts? And the Lord gave me a scripture, and I cannot remember what it is right now. I'll email it to you later.
Yeah.
But the scripture, when I looked it up, because I said, God, is this right? Like, why am I coming up with this stuff? And the scripture was, the thoughts of the righteous are right. I was like, oh, mind blown. I think it was in Proverbs. I was like, oh my God, this is how you're talking to me.
Yes. Ooh,
This is
goosebumps.
so cool.
So good.
And so now I have years of journals that I can go back to where I asked the Lord a specific thing, or he told me something, and I can go back and remind myself what he said.
Wow.
It's huge. It's huge. It's changed my life.
So good. So good. And I would just say, because I could even hear myself, like, I ask him questions, but he doesn't answer me, or, and so it's like, just keep going, just dig deeper, just keep going. He's there. He's always, and sometimes, don't you feel like, though, I don't know, I feel like sometimes your decision either way will get you to where you want to go, kind of thing.
So Romans 8:28, he if you read it in the New American Standard Bible, it says he causes all things to work for the good to those that are called according to his purpose. So even if you go left, he can cause those things to come back into alignment, right? As long as you're willing to sort of follow the prompting. But sometimes when you go left and that's not where he's telling you, you end up having more hurdles than he ever intended for you to.
Right.
Ultimately will get back to where you need to be. So there's a safety net there. Like he will always carry you. And so maybe you do make a mistake, but he can figure out a way to redeem that. And it's a lesson now that you have, that you can share with somebody else about how they need to avoid that road.
Yeah. I love that.
To your point, you said, sometimes you're like, I asked, but I didn't get an answer. There's a lot of times, and there's sometimes I ask the Lord something and I don't get an answer right away.
Right.
And that's okay. But he always answers, I found. And sometimes we miss it.
Yeah.
Like we overlook it. Like he's answered the question, but because, again, it's one of those things you've dismissed over the years, or it came from your child and you're like, you don't know what you're talking. You're a kid. You don't know what you're talking about. Like or it came from a way that you don't expect for it to come. You don't hear it. You're not tuned in. But when you're asking the Lord, you have to make sure you're open to the answer coming to you however he wants to deliver it. So even if it comes from an enemy of yours where you don't listen to anything else they say, he could use that very person to answer or unlock something that you've been asking the Lord to unlock. So you don't despise the messenger, be on the lookout for the message.
Very, very good. And then be obedient. That's been the hardest for me. Sometimes I hear him very clearly, but I'm like, no, that's not what I want to hear. Oh my gosh.
It's so true. If you are willing and obedient, you will eat the good of the land. And, Lord told me, he's like, there's so many people that are willing, like, God, my heart's right. I want to do what you want me to, I want to do what you say. But then when you hear it, you're like, I don't want to do that. And then you don't. And then you have people who are super obedient, but they have a terrible attitude and they're whining, complaining. There is a marriage of the willingness and the obedience that is what will open countless doors for you. And this is the thing, God is so good that everything that he asks you to do, he's going to, number one, do it with you, right? He will be in it with you.
Yeah. Uh-oh. You muted yourself.
Yeah, sorry. He will be in it with you.
Yeah.
And he's gonna equip you to do it. And he's in it, and he knows what's coming that you can't see. And so, for instance, I'll give you a really quick example. I mentioned in one of my episodes, the Lord had me, we were moving and I was like, Lord, I need to move. There was mold in my apartment. And at the time I was living with, and this is, a disclaimer, I haven't always been a perfect Christian, guys. Okay.
Yeah, same.
I was living with my boyfriend at the time, and between the two of us, we had 3 children and we lived in a 3-bedroom apartment. And the Lord was like, okay, it's time to move. And I was like, okay, well, where do we move? Where do we go? And he said, get a 2-bedroom apartment. I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And my boyfriend had a fit about it.
Right.
And, but we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment and it didn't make sense. Well, 4 or 5 months later, my boyfriend dies in a motorcycle accident and his children never came back to my home. And so months ago, when he said get 2 bedrooms, it made no sense. And I didn't want to do it, and neither did he. But I was obedient. And because I didn't have that financial assistance was gone from my partner. I didn't have 2 more children that I needed to house. So what I was in was enough for where I was going.
Wow.
Had I, that's like an extreme example, but you don't know what's on the other side of that obedience.
Wow.
Have to just trust him in it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's huge.
Yeah.
Don't question him.
No, it's okay. I'd be like, we went back and forth, like, Lord, I don't really see what that's about.
Right.
But at the end of the day, just do it. Like, he doesn't mind saying, I don't understand. Can you help me? But you're not always going to understand. You have to know he loves you. He's not going to do anything to hurt you. He will be in it with you. And there's something on the other side of that you can't see that he does. If you can remember those things, it makes it easier to just say, yes, I know if you are allowing these things to happen, there is a purpose behind it. And I think that's something powerful that unfortunately people who aren't believers, they don't have that reassurance that there is a purpose behind everything, even tragic things.
Right.
There's a reason, and it will be redeemed. When people don't believe that that they were created for a purpose, and when people don't believe that there's a reason for the pathways that we go, how hard is that to live your life when it's all for nothing? Like, there's no reason for me to be here. What kind of life is that to live?
Yeah. Wow. So good. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but that's just a little teaser. So you guys will have to go look her up on Facebook or wherever else. Tell us about your podcast real quick. So the Hearing His Voice podcast, you can Google it and find it. I'll put a link, but kind of what made you start that, and what will people hear about there?
So what made me start, I just feel like people are not recognizing when the Lord is speaking to them, and how much breakthrough you will have when you have that open communication line with the Lord, how you can do anything if you just have that available to you. And I find that until you are exposed to how God does things in other people's lives, you won't necessarily recognize it in your own life. And that's learning any new thing, right? Until you see that it's available, you don't know to look for it. You don't know to seek it, right? So I want to expose people to what's available to them, that they can hear God for themselves. And so every Wednesday I have a new episode where I'm talking about different ways that the Lord speaks. I give examples, just like I just did about the apartment, of real life examples of how hearing God has impacted me. I'm going to be having guests that are telling their stories. You'll hear from me. It's just, it opens the whole world to you when you can ask God something, you hear his response, and it's a dialogue, and it's a real relationship with a friend that has your best interest at heart. It will change your life when you can dial into what he's saying. So I want to share that with people. I want people to have that. It's so good. It's such an adventure with God.
And I know she's running challenges, so look for those if you want to hear more. I'm just so excited to know you and see what God does in your life. So thank you for joining.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Look forward to
It's great to finally connect live. All right. Well, if anybody's listening and you have a valuable voice, which each of you do, I would love to hear your story. I just love to bring value to the world, because here's the thing too, because I was listening to all these voices, but I realized some of them were toxic and they were leading me down the wrong path. So I really want to connect people, especially women, just because that's me and my heart is listen to those valuable voices. There are people out there that just want to love you and encourage you and empower you. So find that community. So thank you so much, Krystal.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.